Welcome, everyone. My name is Judd Hendricks. I work with Interfaith Paths to Peace, and I want to welcome you to the Soul-Centric City programs that happen every Tuesday at 12 o'clock. Thank you all for joining us. We are in for a real treat today. Our conversation topic is Perspectives on the Soul, an interfaith panel. And we have a really amazing group of people coming from different religious traditions, different perspectives that are going to speak a little bit about how the soul functions in their tradition, share a little bit about some of the resources around the soul, how the soul is cultivated. Does the soul actually play a role in the philosophy or the theology of that tradition? And I think it'll be a very soulful conversation. So welcome. Every Tuesday, we're having different conversations on how to cultivate the life of the soul and cultivate a soulful city. So welcome to that conversation. I want to encourage you, all of our programs are free, but we are trying to find 100 people that will support the Soul-Centric City program for $25 a month. That will allow us to continue the great program that we're putting together. It's a 2-year initiative. The first year, we're trying to uplift the resources in Louisville to cultivate a soul-centric path and practitioners. And then the second year, we're going to try to enact a citywide curriculum or a citywide path and practices to help us create a soul-centric city. So I'm really excited about the initiative and appreciate all of our different folks that are agreeing to be on the panels and part of these conversations. We are also having every second and fourth Tuesday, we have a program called the Dark Brew Review, where we're reviewing different resources at 1020 Bar, and that's at 7 o'clock. That's another way for us to be together face to face. And so if you're interested in that, come join us. This next Tuesday on the 22nd, February the 22nd, we will be reviewing a book called The Soul's Code by James Hillman. And we'll also be looking at another book of a conversations between Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner around issues of the soul and the spirit. So we're going to be reviewing both of those books February 22nd. And next week at 12:30, I'm going to give some commercials here. Next week at 12 o'clock, excuse me, in our program, we're going to be interviewing looking at sacred spaces and soul crafting organizations. There are a variety of organizations in our area that kind of consider themselves soul crafting, soul shaping organizations. And so we're going to be talking with some of those leaders. And so I hope you'll come back next week at 12 o'clock to hear some of those resources. So let's jump in. We are recording this session, so please keep that in mind. I want to welcome all of our, first of all, our panelists that we have with us, Rabbi Ben Fried, Bishop Huss, Reverend Lori Kyle, Geshe Repgel, and Dr. Spiliotis. I think I'm saying that right. A fabulous group of people, and Jason Heiner with the Baha'i community is also with us. So welcome to our panelists. The process for our conversation is I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and give us a little bit about the context of the tradition that they come from, and then kind of make some initial statements about how their tradition integrates and reflects on the soul. And then we'll go a little bit deeper with some further questions. For those of us that are listening, I hope this is a soulful conversation. To make it so, yeah, I kind of invite us to be present to our own bodies, to be present to our own soul, to be present to our heart. So if you're on the Facebook or you're on the panel or just participating in the conversation, let's take a moment to be present, to be present to our own souls. And even though we can't be face to face, it's really important. We still can be connected to each other. And so kind of invite you to open up your heart to the other people on the call. And even though we're not physically present, we can still rest in the presence that joins us and that connects us. One of the things I do like about Facebook or about Zoom is that it allows us to see each other's faces. And I like to, when I see people speaking, I like to just send them love. And that's one of the things we can do that's not so odd over Facebook, is we can send each other love without other people feeling like we're staring at them. So when our panelists come on, or anybody kind of speaks, let's open ourselves to them, but also have a chance to just send love and blessing to each other. So those of you that are on Zoom, you're also welcome to use the chat and say hi, or words, or echo words that you think are important or that come up for you. And then at some point, we'll be able to bring in everybody's questions that's here together. Thank you all for being here, and let's start with our conversation. Rabbi Fried, I'm going to start with you. Thank you for being on the call today, and welcome. In some ways, welcome to Louisville. This is your first year, but welcome to the call specifically. And if you can share a little bit about yourself, and then kind of jump into a little bit of the perspective from the Jewish tradition. Welcome, Rabbi Fried. Good to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Judd. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I'm really excited to get to learn from other faith leaders here in Louisville. One of the difficult things about moving to a new city during a pandemic is a lot of the opportunities to meet and gather and learn from the interfaith community here haven't been as available to me. So I'm really excited to learn hopefully a lot more than I teach today. I am Rabbi Ben Fried. I just came to Louisville this past summer. I also just became a rabbi this past summer. I graduated from seminary in New York City. Before that, I was a journalist and an Uber driver and a bar mitzvah DJ and a yoga teacher. So a lot of different influences there. But I'm really excited to be here. And the first thing that I want to say is just to make very clear that there's no such thing as the Jewish perspective on anything. And I'm sure many of the other folks on my panel will echo that when they speak about their traditions that they're bringing. But Judaism particularly tends to be a tradition that is rich in perspectives and poor in dogma. We are not a tradition that says this is what you have to believe. There are a lot of things that you have to do. It is an instructive religion, but in terms of dogmatic beliefs, there are not too many. We do have them, but it's not so much. So very often, whenever you hear someone say, Judaism believes this, or the Jewish perspective is X, I always look at that with some skepticism. And so I will share some of my perspectives and some of what I have learned. But I want to be clear that you could ask, some of my congregants on this call who might have different perspectives than me, and theirs would also be valid and wonderful Jewish perspectives. So the one of the things that when Judd asked me specifically about this panel and about this idea of building a soul-centric city and how do we relate to the soul is one of the first things that we're supposed to talk about every day in Judaism, that upon waking up, we say a prayer that you're supposed to say before you even get out of bed that says, Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. I am thankful to you, O God, the who is an eternal ruler, shehechezarta bi nishmati, who has returned my soul to me. That there's an idea in Judaism, as there are in other traditions, that that sleep is, a little bit like kind of a miniature death. And that when we wake up in the morning, our soul is returned to our body, our neshama. And then one of the first prayers that we say when we enter the synagogue in the morning is Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. God, the soul that you have placed within me is pure. But one of the really interesting things about Hebrew is one of those languages where ideas are connected based on the root of a word, that words with similar roots share connection. And there's two primary words for soul and two primary words for breathing. There's a word for breathing in, linshom, and a word for breathing out, linshof. And the two words primarily used to represent soul are nishama and nishifa, or nishama and nefesh. So you hear those same consonants, those same sounds there for breath and for soul. And often There's the other word that is sometimes used for soul or spirit is ruach, which also means wind or air. And that when God breathed the breath of life into humans in Genesis, that same root of breathing, of linshom, ruach hayim, of breathing a breath or an air or a spirit of life. So the Jewish idea of soul is very connected to the Jewish idea of breath. And there's a lot of traditions within Judaism of various, not necessarily breathing exercises, but that our breath is connected to the idea of our soul. And there are Jews who use that often in meditation and thinking about, as I breathe in and as I breathe out, how does that impact my soul, and how can focusing on my breath be a focus in on my soul, on that which is in me, that is, as we said at the beginning, is pure, is good. There's also the concept in Judaism that I know is also true in many other faith traditions, of that humans are created in the divine image, and that there's a part of us then that carries on that is divine, or that is divine-like would be a better way of putting it, that is minted in the image of the divine. And that is also something that is connected to this idea of a soul, of an inner, and different Jewish mystics and different Jewish thinkers have used different words for this. The other terminology that's used a lot around soul in Judaism is various words around light and flame and spark. That having a spark or a flame or a light within one is often words that can often be words that are used to connect to this idea of soul, of intention. And the last thing that I want to close with, and then we can, I'm excited to hear what other folks have to say, is that there's also an idea within Judaism that on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, that we get a neshama yetera, that we get an extra soul. And this idea goes back all the way to the Talmud, and even a little bit before that, of this idea that our soul throughout the week, has to work so hard that in order for it to also get a chance to rest on Shabbat, we have this additional soul that comes and livens us during those 25 hours of the Sabbath of Shabbat, and allows us to reach even higher planes and connect even higher. And later on, I can bring some sources and some texts to speak more about this. But this idea that we have this additional soul, this elevated soul, this ability to raise our soul up an additional level on the Sabbath, is also, I think, a really beautiful principle within Judaism. That even the soul that goes about its work throughout the week, that it too gets an opportunity to rest, and that we as humans get the opportunity to elevate during the Sabbath and have this additional soul, this additional neshama. So that's a little bit from me, and I look forward to hearing what other folks have to add to the conversation.
Thank you, Rabbi Fried. I love that. I love these images, the rich metaphors for the soul. Thank you. Dr. Spiliotis, thank you for being on today, and introduce yourself with us a little more, and share with us some of the perspective from the Catholic tradition. Thank you. And I appreciate, Ben, what you said is that all these traditions are very rich. In fact, in many of these traditions, you may have even divergent views of the soul. And so I'm not asking you to speak for all of your tradition, but thanks for being on.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Evanthea Spiliotis. I teach philosophy at Bellarmine University. I'm a member of the Assumption Greek Orthodox Church. It's Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, not Catholic.
Thank you.
I'm the chanter and choir director there. And I think I'm not an expert. I mean, I'm not even remotely an expert compared to the other panelists on here. But I will share what I know, and already actually from what Rabbi Fried said, I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of interconnections, because both soul and its connection with breath, one of the word psyche is one of the root meanings associated with it is in fact breath. And then also the connection between soul and light. I actually would venture to guess that everybody else is going to have some version of those as well. I'm actually coming at this from a mixture of philosophy and theology. So if we start back in the 4th century with St. Gregory of Nyssa, he's writing very much informed by Hellenism, when you read what he wrote, it actually sounds like he had Aristotle and Plato open. He uses stories from Plato's Phaedo directly, references them directly. He has several passages that sound like he's also reading from Aristotle's writing on the soul. So we get that very deep philosophical tradition, the coming out of Plato and Aristotle, and really informing, I think, how the early church fathers were trying to articulate and understand some of these basic concepts, including the soul. So St. Gregory of Nyssa has this dialogue that he writes between a teacher and a skeptic. And the skeptic is really pushing the line that, there's no proof about soul. Everything's just natural and material. So the first statement that I think maybe we all take it for granted late in the history of religious conversations, but in the early parts, they had to establish that there was something that wasn't just material. And this was actually a really big concern in both Plato and Aristotle's writings. And it centers around, if you just think about our lived experience, which is so informed by the senses, but then we do something with what comes in through the senses. We organize it, we think about it, we make judgments about it, we have categories, and that does not look like it can be explained in terms of materiality. And therefore, there has to be something else. And so soul. Now, going at soul that way, a very strong identification with it is with rationality, that rationality can't be explained in terms of materiality, and therefore there has to be something else. And the way I teach it, when we read the ancient works, for the ancients, soul is the name, but that's not positively defined. I think that actually the positive definition, in my understanding, comes from religion, not from philosophy. So for philosophy, it's that material, matter, motion, and the laws of motion, if you will, cannot explain all that is. And therefore, there has to be some non-material principle or concept. The Greeks love to talk about principle that has to also exist and they describe it in terms of what it's accountable for and what it does, with rationality being primary, but also life. And very simplistic example, right? Rocks are material and we're material, but rocks never move themselves, but we do. Or more direct example, a corpse is exactly, in some sense, the same body as the living being was 5 minutes before death. But the corpse and the living being are not the same thing. And so you have to you must posit something besides body itself. And then it becomes a mystery and a focus of a lot of discussion. What exactly does this mean? So Gregory of Nyssa is bringing in these really Hellenistic arguments and Platonic, more than Neoplatonic, Platonic arguments to establish that, of course, there must be soul. If we go forward from him to St. Gregory of Palamas, who's writing in the 1200s, and who seems to be responsible for a lot of the established Orthodox, and unlike Judaism, perhaps Orthodoxy does have dogmas, established Orthodox teaching accepted through to today about the soul. Gregory Palamas seems to be the founding father, or certainly one of the founding fathers of that. So, and he takes it a lot further than Gregory of Nyssa. So, for example, Rabbi Fried mentioned we're made in the image of God. In Gregory Palamas, it's stronger that we are. What that means is nous, logos, and pneuma, and that we're not God, but we're all of those in our human being and in our human form. And they do two things. The one thing that they do, so nous is intellect. Most standard translation is intellect. Sometimes it gets translated as mind, but there's something a little reductive about mind. So I prefer intellect, and that's also how nous is translated, best translated, I think, when you read Plato and especially Aristotle. So intellect or intelligence, that's nous. Logos is reason, rationality. Reason is able to break things down into pieces. Reason is what's able to give an explanation for something. And then pneuma is spirit. So logos is associated with brain, thinking, mind, and science and understanding, and is very much world oriented and world related. Nous, and there's some disagreement about this and some controversy, but it kind of all circles around. Nous gets associated a lot of times with heart. And it's really, so I want to flesh out nous a little bit, because I think that's really the substance of it. And pneuma is the driving force. Spirit is the driving force. Now, spirit for our natural human self is what drives logos to understand the world and seek to develop an artful appreciation, to develop science, all of that, to take the material from the senses, to do something with it. You have to have something driving you. Logos by itself does not drive itself. So pneuma directs us, and it's our life force. But that means that our whole being is teleologically oriented towards making use of what comes in, understanding it, and developing an artful sense and science and so forth out of it. So that's on the one hand. To understand something with logos is to be able to explain it, give a rationale for it, give definitions. But to understand something deeply, you have to bring nous in. Now, nous in antiquity is being able to understand the whole as a whole. So it's not broken down. It's the synoptic view. But there's something more abstract than that in orthodoxy, because it's not intellect in the sense of brain. It is absorbing and living, seeing with the heart the truth, and absorbing it into yourself and being part of it. And that is really what the central piece is. But we're privileged because we also have access, or the gift of, the divine light, and the divine light allows our nous to be not only tuned towards the synoptic view and the understanding of this world, but to also be turned toward seeing God, not with our eyes, but it's like opening up your heart to, I think might be somehow how some traditions might speak of it, but it's really very, very much, it's intellect in the sense of, the way I say it to my students, when you have an aha moment, right? You've been looking at the same thing over and over and over again, and all of a sudden you realize what it's about. You realize what it means. That seeing is not discursive. It's at a point, it's in a moment. That's the intellection that happens with nous. And it can be turned towards this world. So that's the understanding we have of this world. But it also, and again, driven by the divine pneuma, it can orient us towards God. I'll stop.
No, that was Thank you so much. I want to come back to some of these concepts. Thank you so much for working with these words and bringing in the philosophy too. That's really helpful. I hope we can come back to some of that. Geshe-lo Rapgil, I want to welcome you, and you're coming to us all the way from Oregon, although you're at Drepung Gomang here in Louisville. Would you mind unmuting yourself and joining in the conversation? Thank you for giving us some time, and our hearts expand all the way out to Oregon to include you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jed. And also it's great to see my friends and brothers, sisters, and locally. We're working together. It's a long time ago, interfaith leaders and other leaders. I'm more than happy to join with you all. I love you all and our city. So however, and it's I listen. It is great to representatives, and I know this is a very extensive topic and also very important. And there are many definitions and many kind of meanings for this word and soul. So I just do my best, and with firstly I want to offer my Tibetan greetings, Tashi Dela, you all, and the representatives, faith leaders and friends. And I am happy to have this opportunity of the interfaith discussion and exchange of our idea for our discussion topic, cultivating our soul, centricity. I will do my best present and my own knowledge, and also the understand based on Buddhist view and philosophy. I mean, they have, Jed before he says maybe inside Buddhism there are a lot of difference, but so however, I just do it my understand and then what we are learning from Buddhism. So I think it is very rare to find the exact usage or direct reference to this exact word, the soul, in Buddhist view and philosophy. Maybe that is my I'm trying to say it's very maybe we use some in philosophy and we use some different words and we identify some different qualities of human being. And so because there is no direct or clear objective referential entity when using this word in Buddhism. So however, and the much leader among the Western Buddhist scholars, we find to translate word like consciousness, the soul is leader and consciousness, and life force, and the soul of person. These words, consciousness, life force, and soul of person is in Buddhism is used a lot, used a lot philosophically. But I think it's the leader is Western, philosophy scholars. They are translate the word is soul and inside Buddhism, and there somebody is almost them is translated consciousness and life force and soul and person, to express the trained soul. Among these expressions, as my view, I think the meaning is closer to life force and consciousness, human consciousness and life force, and include to Buddhism. And then now you see, my point where is the word is soul is in Buddhism as very close meaning and part of kind of human consciousness and life force. And then this point is in Buddhism is consciousness and the life force is two primary and what is immutable. It's companions of a human being we thought which a human can't identify and themselves as human. I mean, which is very important. The unique quality is consciousness, love force for the identify human being, the being. So in Buddhism, the human from our base is considered the far more superior and than as form of other living beings. I mean, we always in Buddhism we have like a kind of part of practice and teachings to introduce human life. It's precious human life. It's human. It's basic. It's the frames of other living beings, and the human forms has immense capacities to benefit both oneself and others. That is why we say precious human life. The human life is very valuable and very kind of precious is other lives. And these abilities and further raised by dependence upon the consciousness and the life force. We're talking about precious human life, and human have some very beneficial qualities to benefit oneself and others. This all come from is the human consciousness and the life force. And through education and practice, a human being can cultivate profound and expensive mental qualities like compassion and loving kindness and tolerance and patience, and to benefit other living beings. That's why we talk about the precious human life. These all qualities is come from human consciousness and human life force. Benefit other living beings. And this quiet is clear from our past world history. I mean, we have a lot of examples. And in our time, the religious leaders and also the civic leaders and that we follow and respect have managed to transform their life into a valuable one, and one that has contributed immensely to the service and benefit of others. We have in our recent history is a lot of examples, and so service benefit to others, and it is through the practice of compassion and patience and wisdom that they have succeeded in the past and in present are also involved in promoting peace and quality and truth and justice, and also in environmental, the practitioners, the protectors, which are indeed greatly appreciated and respected everywhere by all people. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say is what we have examples in the past in our human history as their religion leaders and other leaders. Their, practice and their own identify their consciousness and also love force to use and with education and knowledge to serve their oneself and others. They are powerful. Okay. And my conclusion is in Buddhism, we find description of human qualities and derived from human consciousness and to be in extremely important and invaluable ones. And so I'm happy to have some, more discussion, but my understand the word is soul is in philosophy, the Buddhism is pretty close. We find like a human consciousness and life force. Okay, and so that's just my opinion and my understand part of Buddhism. And thank you for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, Geshe-la. I appreciate those words and thoughts. And also, thank you for taking a really hard concept and trying to put it in a language that's not your first language. I can only imagine the challenge of doing that, but appreciate
Thank you.
not only the way what you said, but the way you say it. Thank you for being with us. Reverend Lori Kyle, welcome. Good to be with you. And if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and joining the conversation.
Very good, thank you. As Jed said, I'm Reverend Lori Kyle. I'm minister at First Unitarian Church of Louisville. I'm there in my 3rd year now. And as far as Unitarian Universalism's relationship to the idea of soulfulness, it's an interesting question in our faith tradition. Unitarian Universalists are generally very rationally based individuals. We like science, we like data, we like the concreteness. We are very much a non-doctrinal faith tradition. So that's kind of our calling card, actually. So there wouldn't be any guideposts toward beliefs per se that inform ideas about soulfulness. In fact, I would say that probably one of the things in our faith tradition that we could, this is just me personally speaking, that we could lean a little bit more into is the idea of the internal, the soulful, because we are, as a faith tradition, very, very invested in social justice and relationships with the other. And we're known for that. In the city of Louisville, our church was the church that opened its doors for sanctuary for the protesters back in 2020. And that's a good example of the way that we manifest our faith. But that's a little bit more externally based versus the internal idea of soulfulness. However, if you only look in those directions, then you're missing, in my opinion, the heart and soul of Unitarian Universalism. There are 6 sources that we have in our faith tradition. And these sources inform Unitarian Universalists, and we borrow heavily from many of the other faith traditions from whom we'll hear today. The Judeo-Christian traditions, the world's religions, earth-based traditions, humanists. So there are 6 of these sources, and 2 through 6 deal with other kinds of religious organizations or entities, so to speak, such as the ones that I've just mentioned. But the very first source has to do with one's own soulfulness. And I would like to share with you the specific wording of it. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. For me, that is a very soulful statement and speaks to one's inner experience of the divine, however one might find it. Once again, the idea of God, perhaps we'll talk about this here in a minute if we're talking about theology and theism. But the idea of God is a very diverse idea in Unitarian Universalism. The idea of the soul is also, you'll find many, many different ideas about what this means. I want to share with you a couple of jokes, jokes that actually speak to the diversity and where some people actually land when it comes to things like soulfulness. What is a UU? Someone who believes in life before death. UU prayers. Here's an example of one. Dear God, if there is a God, please save my soul, if I have a soul. The last joke of the day. Visitors in a tour of heaven noticed a group of UUs who were arguing among themselves about whether or not they were really there. So these ideas kind of poke fun at UU's way of seeing things, and it certainly doesn't embody all of Unitarian Universalism, but it is a snapshot about how these things are approached. The last thing that I'll mention at this time is the idea of Transcendentalism. Back in the 19th century, Emerson and Thoreau and other thinkers of those times who had Unitarian Universalist ties brought this this movement about, in which I'll share a little bit about what that means. I'm assuming most of us do, but basically that people, the experience of people transcends or goes beyond the senses of what we can see or hear or taste or touch. So it goes beyond the mundane in those ways. And of course, that's soulfulness. However, a transcendentalist isn't necessarily religious in their beliefs or their approach to this kind of experience, but instead it's a way of understanding relationships in life, relationships to one's inner self, relationship perhaps to the divine, to the natural world. So it's another hallmark, I would say, of Unitarian Universalism in our history, of a way of delving into the idea of soulfulness. I'll let that be that for now. Thanks, Judd.
Thank you, Lori, and love the humor piece there. A lot of this conversation about souls can get very serious, so I love the humor. I think the soul likes humor too. So anyway, thanks for being soulful.
Indeed.
Jason Heiner, thank you for coming, representing the Baha'i tradition, and you've always been so great to be on a lot of our panels. Jason, welcome.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm a person that lives in Louisville, member of the Baha'i Faith. I am not an official representative, so there are no clergy in the Baha'i Faith. The Baha'i Faith is run by elected institutions and then appointed agencies. I do serve in a role where I support Baha'is and community building activities of the Baha'is in Kentucky and West Virginia. But that is not just for Baha'is, but also efforts Baha'is are involved in helping to build community and support, especially young people, children and youth, children with developing their spiritual attributes, but that's open to all people. And these are programs that are very much dear to the hearts of the Baha'i community, and lots of other people that share those desire to support young people, especially in these times when there is so much pressure on them, so many challenges that they're facing, and really offering them support. And for youth, what we call, there's a junior youth empowerment program, for example, that helps with literacy, self-esteem, helps them to express themselves, especially using the arts, and those kinds of things. So that's where I spend my time, and that's what the Baha'i Faith in all countries of the world. These are programs that are being used in over 150 different countries around the world. So the Baha'i Faith is the newest, youngest, I should say, of the world religions, established in 200 countries, and it's really based on the teachings of Baha'u'llah, who said that he was not the first and wouldn't be the last of messengers that have been sent by humanity to raise our consciousness. And of course, the connection is, and the message was that all of the religions of the past are connected. So the teachings, when I speak about the Baha'i view on these things, it really has connections to all of these great speakers that have talked, and perspectives that they shared. And the belief from the Baha'i perspective is that all the religions come from the same source, that there is one source of truth in the universe, that all of these teachings come from the same place. And then they differ in terms of our experiences, the ways that we experience the world, and then we understand those teachings. And so there's so much we can learn from each other. And the Baha'i perspective is that what the number one thing that holds humanity back is our belief that we're right and others are wrong, and that we can't learn from each other, that we can't approach each other with a humble posture of learning, and that the next stage of human history is our evolution beyond this state to a world in which we'll have one global fellowship, where we will not only value the differences and the different perspectives, but learn how to treasure those things and realize that's where so much of the beauty and the wisdom comes from, is understanding the different ways we can understand all of these things. So, and then the soul itself, so the fundamental Baha'i belief on the soul is that every person is born with a soul. Every person is born created noble, that all things in creation reflect attributes of God, whether it's rocks, plants, animals, all of these things reflect certain attributes of God. Human beings have the ability, as it's said in many of this world scriptures, to reflect potentially all of the different attributes of God: kindness, justice, honesty, purposefulness, creativity, all of these things. That's what makes a human being unique. And the soul is the source of that. The soul is our connection to God, that it's not that we have a soul or the soul's contained somewhere in a body, that the soul is associated with God, is what it says in the Baha'i writings. And that is like the light in a lamp. The lamp is like the body, the light is like, underneath the shade, that illumines it. And that this connection is what we all share, and that we fundamentally have all of those attributes, but we have to develop them, and we grasp for these metaphors and understandings, just like many religious teachings, in parables or metaphors, because we're trying to understand something that we don't have a frame of reference for. So the belief is that the soul, exists essentially in this divine plane, the divine world that is right here where we are. But as scientists say, when we look at vision, we only see part of the spectrum, right? We don't see the whole spectrum. And so, and that's, it could be a metaphor, it could be a direct understanding of, we don't see everything that actually exists, right? Our vision literally only sees one part of the spectrum of everything that's there. And it's the same with the soul. The soul exists in the same plane that we are, is the Baha'i view, and that we have this connection to it, and it's what breathes life, as Rabbi Fried said. There's very many metaphors, certainly related to many of these metaphors in Judaism and other scriptures, of the soul as this breath. That gives a beautiful metaphor. And then the last thing I'll finish with is one of the metaphors that's used, that would seem apt to this discussion, that's used in the Baha'i writings, is the idea that the soul is like the body, the baby in a mother's womb. And that child, if you went into the womb and asked, the baby, what's a tree or what's a cloud, right? It would have no frame of reference. You might be able to say, look at a vein and see how it branches off. And, or you might be able to, if you knew, you come from the world and go into the womb, you might say, well, it's like this vein, it's just like, but it's big and it's tall and it's like hard, like your elbow or something. You would try to find a way to relate it to something that a baby in a womb would have a reference for. Well, it's the same way. So one of the metaphors is that in the same way that the child in the womb doesn't understand that it's about to be born into a world where there are people waiting for it. There's people that already love that child, can't wait to be with the child, are there to care for it and nurture it. In the same way that our soul, even though that world is only an inch away, right? That baby is only an inch away from the real world. In the same way, our soul is only, an inch away from sort of the next world. And but we get feelings of it. We might, in the same way that a baby can hear sounds of what's going on out there and the voice of its parents, and that we're just that close, and we get inklings of it in a dream or in a feeling or an intuition. We don't totally have the experience or the frame of reference yet to describe it. And so in all these metaphors that we're doing, in the ways that we're grasping for some of these truths and trying to give form to them, we're trying to use those to understand something that is inevitably kind of beyond our reach. But in the grasping for it, there's a lot of meaning that we find in that, and ways that we can make connections with each other. And so that's a beautiful thing. I've learned so much just being here for 45 minutes or an hour. And so very grateful for this space and for IPP for creating it. So thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Always appreciate that. I love that metaphor that you used about the child in the womb, and we might come back to that one. But before we do, Bishop Huss, welcome from the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints. Thank you so much for being on, and jump on and share some more about yourself and your tradition's view of the soul.
Sure, I appreciate it, and I'm not sure I can add too much more to what's been said. I guess that's the advantage of going near the end of the list here, but I want to just start by talking a little bit about the soul as in my religious faith, in our religious tradition. The soul is connected to God. Its source is God, and so in a very general way, we would describe the soul, or define the soul, as that which God created and gave life. And so in that way, everything that is alive that we look around and see, the beauties of the earth, and it's been mentioned many times already on this call, that we see these elements of divinity in what is alive. And
Bishop Huss, can you speak up a little bit? We're having a
Yeah.
little trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
So, but more practically speaking, I think what the soul refers to in our religious faith is you as a person. It's your relationship with your Creator, who we believe is God and is our Father, and it's that intimate of a relationship that He gave us life, and we have had this relationship with God for what we would describe as eternity. We were souls before we came here and were born in mortality, we had a relationship with God as our Father. We were born here, and we now have physical bodies that we're learning to use and control and manipulate, and upon death, our spirits, our souls return to God. And through this process, we retain that very unique personal identity of being God's child. And it is an identity that is universal for all living things. Every person, every living thing has this very intimate personal connection with God. You have always been you. You will be you in relation to God when you leave the earth. And so when we use the soul, the term soul, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what we're referring to is this child-father relationship that has a divine plan set forth by our Creator to be more like Him. And so it gives our life meaning, or it gives our life purpose, and it gives us kind of a context, a perspective from which we can look forward and backward and see ourselves in this divine pattern of learning and development, and seeing each other as fellow travelers, brothers and sisters who are working really hard to keep that relationship with God fresh and new, and using that relationship to grow and to be better. So there is, I think, there is a beauty in the word soul. I really enjoyed hearing all of the different perspectives, and what I found to be most interesting is that it's nearly undefinable until you start talking a little bit about it, and then you realize that it's very difficult to put God in a box and keep Him there with a definition. But if we refer to the soul as what makes us alive, what gives us purpose, and we're not just here with no reason, that God really is, he's careful about teaching us. He is interested in you as a person, and He has made a plan for you. And so that, I think, is probably one of the more distinct teachings about the soul from my religious faith.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. So before we have a question, again, the topic here is what are the perspectives on the soul? And I imagine there's some perspectives that haven't been brought up yet. So even if you're not on the panel, or especially just those that are participating, we got a great group here. Would anybody else want to just kind of unmute and share your perspective of the soul, especially if it hasn't really been expressed yet? Just give a moment to see if somebody on the, just unmute yourself and join in the conversation. If you feel like you have a perspective that hasn't been reflected yet, please unmute and share it. Well, I guess I'll kind of jump in on that sense before we. I do want to open it up to some questions for our panelists. I'm kind of a Jungian kind of guy, and so the way Carl Jung often talks about the soul is also connected to the sense of the self, which is the. In some ways, Jung says that the soul is not a thing, but it is a process. It is a holding. It is that capacity to integrate all of our experiences and all of our parts. And then that process then not only turns inward to make a sense of wholeness of all of our experiences, all of our parts, but then turns outward to relate to the spirit itself. So Bill Plotkins talks about the soul as being the largest conversation we can have with the world. And I kind of like that. So it's the whole self in relationship with the other. And it's the functionality of the soul to be about holding, about making us whole. And also, he also connects it to the self. So that's one perspective I thought I'd bring in. Is anybody else have a perspective before we open it up to some questions? So what I'd like to do, I'd be interested in panelists. I don't want to go through you all the same way, but I would be interested in anything that came up for you when the other panelists were speaking. Did it spark something in you? Is there any, or are there any questions for our panelists that you would like for them to go back and clarify maybe a perspective or something they said? Feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in.
I was going to add one, Jed, because this is a perspective, maybe we didn't talk about, is like, why do we have a soul? Like, why, if we have a soul, why do we have one? And why are we here? Matt talked, I think, a little bit to this, but I was thinking of Carl Sagan, who is a scientist and an atheist, but he said something that's really thought-provoking and almost sounds scriptural, where he said, "We are a way for the universe to know itself." And so I love that. And I think that you could, however you conceive of God, if it's, God, the universe, creator, the connectedness of us all of those things, you could find some meaning in that idea of like, we are a way for the universe to know itself. There are these parables of like, God created humanity because God was alone and wanted, someone to love, right? That sort of could have some meaning to this idea of why, we're souls created, why we created. I just thought that's an interesting perspective to bring in and maybe consider, this idea of the soul.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Jason.
May I
Please.
jump in?
Yes.
One of the things that stood out, I think, in terms of questions. So one of the things that struck me both prior as I was preparing for today, but also just listening to all of the panelists, is there's the self. And so there's the wholeness of the self. That seems to be a recurring theme. There is the social justice, so the caring for others, recognizing the community that you live in the world and that you're part of that. And then there's God. You get the metaphor of light, but God as, I know that there's an aspect when we talk about God that God is immanent, but there's also an aspect of God that God is transcendent. So I think I guess I've been struggling with this because certainly both the two thinkers I referenced, Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory Palamas, they're both very much about the self, right? And the individual relationship to self, to world, but not acting necessarily, and then God. And so it's really about seeing God, opening your heart to God, opening your mind to God. I think I really like the Buddhist tradition, the consciousness and life force, and then that if you have that in good order, that prepares you to go out to the world. But I think also that in that there is a question, and the divine at least, or God for me comes up as a question, and that is all that there is this world, and in this world and the working for others, or is there more? And the intellect, so the way the Orthodox fathers talk about it, they talk about the intellect's achievement of enlightenment, but I think about the intellect as a capacity that we have to open ourselves up to that as a question. So you open up, you ask yourself, it's the capacity to see wholes, communities, unities, but it's also the capacity to question whether you've seen and understood all that is. And if the question is, how do we live mindfully or soulfully, I'm wondering if an aspect of that is opening ourselves up to the question.
I love that. Yeah, thank you. What else is coming up for anybody?
Judd,
Yes. Welcome, Joyce.
hi. This may be, and I think is as part of IPP's programming the whole year, but maybe we could just talk a little bit here about healing and the soul. I know Mongolian shaman who did their healing through trances and dreams at night would bring back a soul that left the body during sleep at night, and then that's where they would do their healing and then bring the soul back healed. So I'm just wondering if people in the different traditions could talk a little bit about healing and the soul. I mean, we've talked about here the pure soul with which we are born, but in the daily living, the soul, I don't know quite the right word, but is overlaid with thoughts and feelings and fears. And so how do we heal the soul?
That's a beautiful question. Anybody want to kind of jump in?
Judd, I'll jump in.
Yes, please.
I think in the Latter-day Saint tradition, and Bishop Huss can help me here if I go astray, but the soul is healed through repentance and through the atonement of Jesus Christ.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts, perspectives? Thank you, Terry.
I think it's an interesting I think part of what I guess my question to the question in the Jewish tradition, you answer a question with a question, is I think a little bit of my question is, are we talking about how do we heal our souls or how do our souls heal us? Which I think are like two connected, but one assumes that there's a way for the soul itself to be injured and that is in need of healing, and then how do we heal it? And the other is more an assumption that the soul is that part of us that can help to heal us when we need it. And I think there's room for both of those. I don't think that one is right or one is wrong, or that that has it. But I think that, it go to me when I think about, healing of the soul specifically, I think about Shabbat. I think about that, both what I talked about at the beginning of having that extra soul, that neshama yetera, but just like what unplugging for a day can do for your soul. What, not having the bombardment of life can do for your soul. That the thinker Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel talked about how, 6 days a week we slave and we work for the world, and then the 1 day a week we work on ourselves. That the 1 day a week our only project is to be with ourselves and to heal might not be the word that he would use, but to build our soul. And so I think that when I think of what healing looks like rest, like the ability to breathe, that Shabbat gives us that space so that we can do that breathing that again is so connected to the idea of soul in Judaism, and it gives space for that sort of healing and that sort of correction, if you will.
That's beautiful. There's also a comment made by Japa that's just connecting this. He says, the soul of the city may arise when our various interests breathe and pulse to strengthen our connection and mutual benefit. Boy, I love your weaving a lot there into that, Japa. I love that. Breathing together our mutual interests. That's beautiful. Thank you. Other thoughts that are coming up? What do you feel?
I had a thought, Judd.
Please.
This is Reverend Lori Kyle.
Thanks, Lori.
What comes to mind in answer to this very good question about healing of the soul is our a writing by UU theologian Jacob Trapp. He wrote a piece called To Worship. And the word worship could easily be interchanged with healthful soulfulness. And he kind of makes this listing. And for me, it boils down to connection. We become healed when we're connected to our truest, deepest selves, to the natural world, to God as we experience the divine. Certainly connections with each other. So there are examples here in this beautiful piece of writing. He says I'm going to change the word worship to healthy soulfulness. Healthy soulfulness is to stand in awe under a heaven of stars, before a flower, a grain of sand. It's to be silent. It's to work and then stop work and listen to music. It's to healthy soulfulness is loneliness seeking communion. And that really directly speaks to the connection piece. And it moves through deeds of kindness and through acts of love. And when I read these words and concretely think about the manifestation of these kinds of things in my own personal life, that in fact is what heals my troubled soul. When I am engaging in deeds of kindness and acts of love. And when I do take the time to quiet myself and really immerse myself in the natural world and draw from that. So anyway, that would be my contribution. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. Thank you, Lori. Alina, you had your hand up. Would you want to unmute and share?
Sure. So this is a very interesting conversation for me because I came out of the Greek Orthodox tradition and was on my faith journey and was in and out of the Baha'i faith for a while, and then was in and out of the Jewish faith for a while. And then suddenly found myself at the Unitarian Universalist Church with Reverend Lori, who's been amazing. And so I've got all these different ideas about the soul, but I think I want to talk more on what Reverend Lori was saying about interconnectivity. And this question about healing, at least for me, really has to do with uplifting others and connecting with others and helping others. And I don't really know. I don't know if I believe in a soul. I don't know if I believe in a soul, but I definitely think that the point of like our breath and our livingness is to honor the living things around us and to be one with them. So when we look up at the stars, or like the poem that Reverend Lori just said, I got chills when she read it. And those are my thoughts.
Beautiful, Elena. Thank you for being on the call today. You're quite our interfaith. You're our poster person for interfaith work there. Thanks for being on the call, and you've tapped into the deep soulfulness of these different traditions. So thanks for sharing. Yeah, Tind, what else is coming up for us as far as what are we connecting to? What are the images? What are we feeling? What's coming up? Other people join in the call. Just unmute yourself or put your hand up.
One, Judge, just from two of the most recent things briefly is, one of these things, the oldest form of meditation, of course, and mindfulness is just listening to yourself breathe, right? Sitting and listening to yourself breathe. I'm really inspired by things that people talking about with the quietness, the stillness, right? That's where, in a sense, that's where we can maybe realize this idea of the soul or consciousness, however you want to think of it, and realize that, and healing comes into this too, realize that we aren't our feelings, we aren't our pain, we aren't our sickness. We can observe those things and then seek to sort of understand that we are something apart from those things, whether that you think of that as your soul or your consciousness or however. And it's one of the most powerful things that we have to sort of understand ourselves, is to observe even how we feel and react to all of those things. And then just the other one, that one of the comments, so much wisdom, so many comments, I don't even remember which one brought this one up, but also this idea, there's this idea in Baha'i tradition that Baha'u'llah, there's a quote that he says, if we knew the value and the benefit that suffering and challenges and all of these things have on our soul in developing, our soul, or can have, we would actually pray for more of them. Now, I can say I've never gotten to that point. Like, they seem to find me okay by themselves. I've never prayed for more challenges or sickness or anything. But I think the idea is that we tend to naturally, flee from pain and move toward pleasure, when in fact, sometimes it's the pain and the challenge and the suffering that has the greatest effect on our soul. And we see it in our own compassion for others, our own kindness to others, our own ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes as well. So yeah, just thought I'd share those two things that came up.
If I can just piggyback off that real quick. I'm sorry, Jessica, I know I just saw you put your hand up, but if you don't mind, I just want to piggyback off of that I think that there's actually a really interesting debate within Jewish tradition about when we have trials and tribulations in this world, how that plays out, because one of the things we haven't talked about so much is, what happens to our soul, if anything happens to our soul after we die, and what happens to our life consciousness or what. And I know that it's been touched on a little bit, but there's an argument in the Talmud about whether or not, because one rabbi puts forward an idea that sufferings in this world mean greater reward in the world to come. And that the reason that righteous people are given suffering in this world is so that they can have a greater reward in the world to come. And another rabbi comes in and says, no, that's baloney. Why would God make us suffer in this world in order to have this greater reward? And crucially, there's no declaration of a winner in this argument. Because I think what Judaism recognizes is that different people need different answers to the same questions sometimes. That different people need different answers to, why am I suffering? Why am I having these challenges? And for some people, it will be so that my soul can rise and change right now in this world, and that I can improve upon myself, or all of these things. And some people just say, no, this is really hard, and I need to believe that something will happen later when I'm out of control, so that this will all be worth it. And that different people are going to find different answers to those questions. And I think one of the things that Judaism recognizes is that across Jewish writing, there's an idea that something happens after we die, but we don't know exactly what it is. And a lot of people have a lot of different ideas of what it is. But within Jewish tradition, there's not lack of dogma. There's not this is exactly what happens after we die. And so there is a concept of a soul that lives on, but it's unclear exactly what happens to it. I just thought that Jason's comment about kind of the trials and how our souls react to that ties into one of those Jewish ideas of what that might be, if not every Jewish idea of what that might be.
Thank you, Rabbi Fried. I really appreciate that. I love these about our traditions, and your traditions represent this so well. This dialogical nature, this polarity management in these traditions, where there is this tension. And Carl Jung would say that cultivates soul. Anytime we can hold two opposites together in a generative, creative way, so that consciousness is raised in its answering, or not even it's in working it out, but just holding that, cultivates soulfulness, it cultivates depth, it cultivates consciousness. And your traditions are so beautiful in doing that. So, but Jessica, I'm going to turn to you, but then I'm going to give 30 seconds to our panelists to check out. So panelists, you get the last word, and I would love for you to just kind of think for a moment what's been really meaningful or important to you in this conversation, and then I'll give you 30 seconds to check out. But Jessica, we're going to come to you before that, so unmute and share.
What a great conversation. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I typed out some thoughts when talking about the soul and pain and injury. And I mean, as part of my faith tradition, we have this idea that we're going to suffer because of choices that we make, and we're going to suffer because of choices that other people make. And there's this focus with our soul that we find purpose in that pain. So the goal is ultimately to have post-traumatic growth. And we allow ourselves to do that because of the testimony that Jesus Christ and his atonement reconciles all of the wrongs and creates justice to give us this ability to find growth in our pain. But that doesn't sound very fun. But the soul experiences joy and happiness and all of the good things because we learn to identify the good when we know what it is to feel the bad, and that our soul is here for that purpose, and that we take that knowledge with us wherever we go after death.
Thanks, Jessica. I really appreciate that. So we're going to go backwards this time. Instead of, we're going to start with Bishop Huss, if you wouldn't mind unmuting, and then I'll kind of call us back in the way in which I called us, but backwards. Bishop Huss?
Sure.
You do a checkout for us. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really appreciated everybody's comments, and I guess as a parting thought, based on where our conversation seemed to end, I would just reiterate the hopefulness of our souls being connected to God, that while there is an incredible amount of pain and suffering in the world, that God is the author of joy and happiness and peace, and intends for us to experience joy even in this life, and that is achieved through our connecting our souls to him. And so that would be, I think, my parting thought to all of you. And I appreciate the opportunity, Jed, again.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, good to have you with us. Thanks. Jason?
Yeah, one, thank you for everybody, panelist, audience, everybody for being here. Such a joy to share this space with everyone. And I'll just end actually with a quote, not from my own tradition, but from another tradition, sort of in the sort of olive branch sense of this whole gathering in space, which is one from, there's a beautiful quote from Buddhist writings that says, "You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body." So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thanks for being on today. Lori Kyle, I think you were next, but if you wouldn't mind checking out, thank you for being on today.
You bet. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for all the good sharing that we've heard and the questions. My parting commentary would be about atheism, actually. I think atheists are one of the most misunderstood groups in the history of the world. There are a lot of atheists in my faith tradition, and I think that's because those folks are not compelled by a concrete idea of what the divine is, and they just move in their own way where that is concerned. But there certainly are many people who identify as atheists who come to church, who come to my church, seeking something, seeking connection, very aware of their inner selves and the inner selves of other people and the sacredness of the universe in which they live. Very, very much like the faith traditions that we're hearing about. So there's actually quite a bit of overlap. And so just a plug for people who tend to get misunderstood on a regular basis, including when it comes to things like soulfulness. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Lori. That was very inclusive. In fact, I consider myself an atheist. I'm not a theist, and I'm a sacred humanist, but I appreciate the inclusiveness. When we get into these words like interfaith, we really all have to say intersectional or intercultural or interphilosophical, and you're including all of us in that comment is very welcome. So thank you, Lori. Geshe-la Rapgil, if you wouldn't mind closing out. And again, we're with you out in Oregon. I know you're out there because of a family funeral. And so know that our souls and or a friend's funeral, know that we're with you out there as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm really grateful. And it's a wonderful gathering. And then I learned so much of the traditions, and really, it's a wonderful gathering. I always love to this kind of special interfaith gatherings, and I'll say again, in Buddhism is pretty this words connect and close to consciousness and life force, and I hoping to, in the Buddhists understand our consciousness and life force have some innately and the value and then the qualities too, and hope our the brains the happiness ourselves and others, and to benefit ourselves and oneself and others. I'm hoping we can cultivate our consciousness and life force and whoever these good qualities, and to make the more peaceful community and beneficial to our city and entire world. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-la. Yeah, good to have you with us. Avanthia, thanks so much for your perspective, and if you wouldn't mind checking out what's showing up for you.
So as I was listening to the last part, everyone talking about suffering, the Greek word for suffering, patho, is also just the word for being affected. So to suffer is just to experience. And we tend to think about it in a negative way. So the Passion of Christ, for example, but it's actually it's more neutral, and I think that it, when I think about what I was reading preparatory to today, it's opening ourselves up to that, opening our hearts up to it, so that we can experience and absorb it and understand it and grow from it. And some of that kind of points to that it's opening ourselves up to this life. It's not turning away from this life, but that when we open ourselves up to this life, that there's a suggestion, a strong suggestion in Orthodoxy, that you open up yourself to God, to something that might be higher or greater than this life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Avanthia. I appreciate you being on today. Rabbi Fried.
Yeah, I just want to first of all say thank you so much to everyone. It was such a pleasure to be with you and to learn with and from you. I'm going to close with 2 pop culture recommendations that I think have been influencing me in the way that I think about the soul. The first is a sitcom, The Good Place, created by Michael Schur. If you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, I think it's a tremendous meditation on what it means to be a good person and what happens to our souls after we die, and it's also hilarious. And the other is the movie Soul by Pixar. I watched it with when I was still in rabbinical school with a couple of other rabbinical school students, and we were all crying by the end of it. But that's what a good Pixar movie does. But I think that both of those, I think that we can learn about the soul from our faith traditions. We can learn about it from our texts, but sometimes we can also take advantage of contemporary media to learn and to grow and to be influenced and to be impacted. And also to laugh. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi Fried. Well, I know, I'm not sure exactly what my soul is, but I know it's been fed today. So a deep bow to each of you for your wisdom and presence on the call today. And what does it mean to create a soul-centric city is the question that we're journeying with the next 2 years. And so we start looking at soulful development next month in March, looking at the stage from birth to 5 years old. And then each month we'll take a different life stage, asking the question, how can we cultivate the resources in our city needed for integral, healthy, and soulful development from cradle to grave? So stick around this year as we have these programs. And thank you all for being such a rich resource in our community. And I feel like the soul of Louisville is emerging in these conversations. So thank you all for being a part of that. And you're welcome to unmute yourself and do one of those kind of cacophony checkouts and saying thanks. And thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so
So long,
much.
all. Take care.
You all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Peace.